Hi everyone, this video is part 5 of the unit in clinical psychology that we are covering in AP psychology. This particular video I will cover somatoform disorders, dissociative disorders, and eating disorders. They're all going to be lumped into this category of other disorders, so each disorder is related to its own category, but the categories themselves are a little unrelated. So to start with, this information is coming from the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM-5, which the purpose of this book is just to classify, define, and help medical professionals diagnose mental illnesses. So to start with, somatoform disorders or somatic symptom-related disorders, they all boil down to the word soma, which means body. And so according to the DSM, these disorders share this common feature of somatic symptoms, meaning there's some kind of body symptom or physical symptom that's causing them distress. So to start with, somatic symptom disorder. Somatic symptom disorder is a psychological disorder in which the symptoms that the person has are bodily or they're somatic. However, what makes them not just a physical illness is that they don't have a physical cause. So the person might be experiencing pain or blurred vision or difficulty swallowing, or maybe they're vomiting. So they're having these physical symptoms, but they're not actually having a physical cause. And so this often will cause them a lot of distress, not knowing where the cause is. It's going to have usually cause the person anxiety and worry. Now, I think somatic symptom disorder is very similar to conversion disorder, so I put them together, but they are different. So somatic symptom disorder is where there is this physical symptom without a physical cause. Conversion disorder is a neurological symptom, so sensory, motor, these could be all different kinds of things. Like if we're thinking about sensations, this could be loss of sight. If we're thinking about motor, this could be seizures or paralysis, or just difficulty or loss of sensations. And what makes this not a physical illness or disorder is that it is, or a neurological disorder is that it's not having a neurological cause. So when the doctor goes and tries to examine, there is not a neurological cause. And so it's believed that conversion disorders are related to some kind of psychological stress, and it's given the name conversion because it's as if that psychological stress was converted into a physical one, or a neurological symptom. The next somatoform disorder is illness anxiety. So illness anxiety is something that students are usually familiar with, but they are more familiar with the term hypochondriasis, or if someone is a hypochondriac. So the actual term is illness anxiety, and that is when the person has a high level of anxiety and preoccupation with contracting a serious illness. So they're really concerned that they might have or get an illness or a disease. Now it has to last at least 6 months, and this anxiety is something that they are preoccupied. They might believe they're going to contract more than one serious illness, and this is going to cause them a lot of stress and worry. The next somatic symptom-related disorder is a fictitious disorder, and I think it sounds a lot like the word fictitious with an I, which I think might actually help you remember this disorder. This is a disorder in which a person is actually deceiving people, so they're falsifying their bodily symptoms. This is formally known as Munchausen syndrome. This is where a person is not actually sick, but they're creating the sicknesses, and the purpose for them is they have an intense need for attention or sympathy. Now, a fictitious disorder can also be what's called by proxy, which means the person is falsifying the symptoms through another person, or they are creating those illness symptoms through someone else in order to get that attention or sympathy. Next is our next category of disorders. They are dissociative disorders. And dissociative disorders are disorders in which someone disconnects with some part of their life, or they are separating from some point or some part of their life. And this is frequently found after some kind of trauma that the person has gone through. And then somehow they are separating from either their memories or their thoughts, their feelings. They might even separate from their consciousness for a while, or even their own identity, but it's becoming separate from some part of their life or disconnecting with. The first dissociative disorder is a feeling of detachment. And so there's two types. There's depersonalization and derealization. Depersonalization is this experience one has when they feel detached from themselves. So it's a feeling as if they're an observer into their own thoughts, or an observer into their actions, or even being in this out-of-body experience in which they're able to watch and almost outside of themselves. Derealization, on the other hand, is feeling detached from your surroundings. It's a feeling of fogginess or dreamlike experience. Dissociative amnesia is a psychological disorder in which a person is losing some kind of information about themselves. It's an amnesia, but it's not an ordinary forgetfulness. This is a loss of memory that is following a traumatic event. And so that traumatic event triggers this memory loss, and the person can lose a range of memories. It could even be memories prior to that event, and it could be memories about themselves and who they are, and even their own identity of who they are and where they've been, and who their family members are. Sometimes with dissociative amnesia, someone might have a fugue state, or they might fugue. And this is a symptom of dissociative disorders in which a person wanders away or travels in the midst of their dissociative state. And so it could seem maybe purposeful or possibly a bewildered wandering, but typically that person is going to arrive somewhere else with this amnesia, not knowing who they are or maybe even where they're from, and not have personal information about themselves due to that psychological trauma. And so a fugue state is this traveling state of wandering. Next is dissociative identity disorder, or DID. And this is an extremely rare psychological disorder in which a person is exhibiting two or more distinct personalities or alters. And this is a separation. So dissociative disorders are separations, or a disconnecting from the self. And so when these alters or personalities take over the consciousness of the person, they're losing touch with themselves at that point. Typically when an alter appears, the person will not have memory of what occurred when that alter was present. Alters typically have different voice tones, mannerisms, behaviors, even handwritings, different than the individual themselves. And so, like I said, there's typically memory gaps whenever the alter takes place and takes over that consciousness, in which they're not aware of what's going on when that alter takes place. Now, it's believed that DID is a result of significant trauma and abuse. Psychologists believe that these are situations where the person is trying to cope, and what happens is their mind fragments, where alters are the way of coping, and these alters form to protect the psychological state, or from experiencing or reliving that psychological harm. Oftentimes people with DID will have varying alters, ranging from children to strong men to maybe even a strong woman, or a weak adolescent, or an angry adolescent, or just they could range from age to gender, and oftentimes these are triggered by different events going on in their life, and that alter moves in and takes over the experience of what that person is going through in the midst of their daily life. Next is eating disorders and feeding disorders. Eating disorders and feeding disorders are disorders that students are often more familiar with. It's something that students often cover in health. So I will go over these, but I'll try to make sure I clarify the difference because I think sometimes they can seem similar. So anorexia nervosa is an eating disorder. Sometimes students just refer to it as anorexia. So this is when a person has an intense preoccupation with weight gain, or even with appearance, or the possibility of becoming overweight. And it becomes a disturbance in their actual thinking. And what they do in the behaviors that they do is they have a strict limitation of what they eat and what they take in. And so essentially they're maintaining a starvation type of diet. Typically as far as when a diagnosis is occurring, the person will likely be of low body weight, of what's normal for their age range. They're also going to talk about having this intense fear of gaining weight, even regardless of what their true appearance and weight is. And they often have a disturbed perception of what their body looks like, regardless of the numbers on the scale. So anorexia nervosa is this intense preoccupation with weight gain, and the result is restricting their eating and restricting food and energy intake. Bulimia nervosa, or sometimes people just refer to it as bulimia, is different in that rather than restricting eating, in bulimia, often what's seen is binge eating episodes. So this is characterized by binge eating. So periods where the person is eating more in a time frame than what would be typical for that sitting or that circumstance. And then binge eating is also classified as feeling out of control. So in that moment of eating, feeling unable to control the eating. And so bulimia nervosa is this binge eating episode followed by guilt and purging. So specifically what makes something bulimia nervosa is the purging that comes afterwards to try to rid the body of the food. This can be done in many ways, and people find many ways to rid themselves of the food. And it depends on what the person has access to or what they feel more comfortable with. And oftentimes they look at different methods, but it ranges from vomiting to using laxatives to excessive exercise to extreme fasting methods, and then going back through that cycle of binging and purging. So in order to get a diagnosis or to receive a diagnosis of bulimia nervosa, the binging and purging behaviors will occur on average once a week for at least 3 months. Lastly are the two disorders on the screen, binge eating disorder and pica. So binge eating disorder follows bulimia nervosa in that binge eating disorder is very similar, where there's episodes of binge eating, but what makes this different is it's not followed by a period of purging. And so a binge eating disorder would be where someone is going through episodes at least once a week for at least 3 months, where they are going through these periods of out of control eating, but not doing the purging, but still experiencing those times of guilt and frustration over the binge eating. Pica is a feeding disorder in which a person is craving or chewing on substances that don't have nutritional value. So this would also be something that is not appropriate for their developmental level. So young children, especially toddlers, are going to be putting things in their mouth and chewing on them. That is not going to be a diagnosis for children. This is something that's atypical for this age range. So the substances that they're either chewed or ingested, but they tend to vary from paper, soap, cloth, hair, string, wool, soil, chalk, talcum powder, paint, gum, metal, pebbles, charcoal, coal, ash, clay, starch. And so these are things that the person is taking in that it has no nutritional value. Sometimes the cause is a deficiency like zinc or iron, but typically medical attention is not usually sought until there's some kind of complication like a bowel obstruction or gastrointestinal issues, or if the person ingests something toxic. So that's pica. Okay, so what we covered, or what I covered in just that short 15 minutes, was somatoform disorders, which are disorders with bodily symptoms. Dissociative disorders, the disconnecting or separating from oneself, and then eating disorders. I hope this was helpful.